Hey, it's Matt Robison, and here's our latest episode of Political Rehab, our mashup of PTI meets The Daily Show, where a Republican and a Democrat try our best to have a good time with the week's news. This episode was previously recorded, but before we get to it, I want to mention that we try to record as close to episode release as possible, but we can't anticipate the future, and news moves awfully fast these days. So you're going to hear us talk about the news of this week, which was largely about the White House being in rapid retreat on the violent ICE operation in Minnesota. And subscribers to my Substack, worthknowing.substack.com, will have seen this morning that I wrote about the subtle news item that broke late yesterday that embattled Republican Senator Susan Collins made one phone call to DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. That was all it took to end a similar ICE operation that had just gotten started in Maine, revealing that for the Trump administration, this is all politics and it's all corruption. But in addition, two other big things have changed in just the last few hours. First of all, the news that veteran journalist Don Lemon was arrested for covering a protest at a church, showing that the Trump immigration crackdown is really about going after his enemies among Democrats and the media. And then second, the story that President Trump called Alex Preti, the nurse who was tragically killed by ICE agents in Minneapolis last week, an agitator and possibly an insurrectionist. After a video emerged of Mr. Preti in a confrontation with federal agents at a protest 11 days before he was killed. At the end of this episode, as part of our regular Dose of Hope segment, Matt and I actually addressed that video and what the story of Alex Preti really says. So we'll leave that discussion to the end of the episode, but I hope you'll hang on for it. Suffice it to say that all of these news items can once again cast doubt on how much Donald Trump and his administration really are in retreat, or really believe in anything, or really are making any changes. With that, let's go to the episode.
Blaming advisors is a coward's move. It lets Republicans criticize Trump without actually holding him accountable.
This is a classic Washington blame-storming exercise.
When you hire bad people, you just get bad results.
Democrats, our approval rating is not much different. Maybe we should admit that we have a little bit of a problem. Welcome to Political Rehab, smart politics without the hangover. I'm Matt.
And I'm Matt.
Today, a White House in retreat, a massive Washington blame-storming operation. Is Hollywood sinking the Democrats? The rallies are back, and our court's about to make us go cold turkey on America's most popular drug. But let's start, as always, with our Trump dump.
Time for the Trump dump.
That's right. It's time for the Trump dump, our weekly segment where we try to do our very best to get it all out of our system, because it doesn't matter if you're a Republican, Democrat, or independent. There's something Trump did this week that pisses you off.
And this week, the thing that pissed me off was the incident surrounding Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, who was attacked while giving a speech. The attacker was quickly wrestled to the ground, and it appears that the substance that was sprayed on her was harmless, possibly apple cider vinegar. Of course, we know that now. When President Trump was asked about it, whether he'd seen the video, his immediate response was to say, "No, I don't think about her. I think she's a fraud. I really don't think about that. She probably had herself sprayed, knowing her." Three huge problems here. First, as we've seen many times before, Trump is just an absolute lowlife of a human being. You hear that someone was attacked, the very first thing you say is a grade school insult followed by conspiracy nonsense. Second, did you notice how even in the course of giving a couple of sentences of response, he can't help dancing around the truth? He's asked, "Have you seen the video?" He says, "I don't think about her. I think she's a fraud." He can't even answer a simple factual question. That's what requires the follow-up further down from the reporter. And even when he gives his answer, it's pretty sus, as the kids would say, because he both claims not to have seen it and to know all about it. And third, notice the context of his attack on Omar. It's on a member of Congress. Capitol Police reports 14,938 threats directed against a member of Congress that they had to investigate in 2025, a massive increase from the 9,474 that occurred in 2024. What changed? One possibility is that we magically got more divided and it was on both sides and absolutely nothing caused it. Or there's the Occam's razor explanation. As was true the first time Trump was elected, his violent attacks on his opponents shifted the Overton window, shifted the permission structure, and gave people looking for an excuse to escalate the exact excuse they needed. And by the way, Trump has a particularly nasty habit of applying this to members of Congress. Just a couple of days ago, he was told that Republican Senators Tom Tillis and Lisa Murkowski had said that DHS Secretary Kristi Noem should be out of a job. They called them losers on top of previous comments that they were disgusting and reprehensible. Do you maybe see a problem here? It doesn't matter if you agree with a politician's politics. Ilhan Omar's politics are no more my cup of tea than Steve Scalise's. But if you can't say without hesitation that physically attacking public officials is reprehensible, then it's disqualifying for a role in public life, or your name is Donald Trump, or both.
I am tired of Trump trampling on the Constitution. Over the last year, the First Amendment has been treated as an inconvenience. The Fourth and Fifth Amendments are brushed aside in the name of law and order. The 10th Amendment is ignored whenever it gets in the way. It's like the Bill of Rights is his bingo card, and he's trying to see how many freedoms he can cross off. What I didn't expect, and what I didn't have on my bingo card, was that Trump was coming for the Second Amendment. After ICE agents killed Alex Preti, Trump said Americans can't bring guns to protest. Kristi Noem, Kash Patel both said people cannot bring firearms to protest. Let me be crystal clear. The Constitution says otherwise. And I used to be able to count on the GOP president to know this. And we can't ignore the double standard. In 2020, Kyle Rittenhouse walked into a protest with a rifle and killed 2 people. Republican leaders called him a defender of the community. Donald Trump defended him. Mark and Patricia McCloskey, who waved guns at Black Lives Matter demonstrators from their front yard in St. Louis, spoke at the RNC convention. But it's not just the hypocrisy. It's how easy Trump dismisses constitutional rights, how clear that it is that he has no core principles. For my Republican friends who ask why I criticize Trump so much, do you understand me now? Do you see it? Do you see now that every right, even the Second Amendment, is at risk under Donald Trump? He doesn't believe in limited government. He doesn't believe in constitutional restraint. He doesn't believe in conservative principles. He believes in power. And don't give me the excuse that Trump just got bad advice. Blaming advisors is a coward's move. It lets Republicans criticize Trump without actually holding him accountable, without making him mad. It sounds brave, but it's spineless. So let's stop pretending this is who Trump is. This is who Trump has always been. And this is why it's the duty of every Republican to call him out.
Speaking of casting blame on advisors, it's time for our rundown. And first up, of course, is the rapid backpedal that we're seeing out of the White House in recent days over the fallout from the murder of Alex Preti in Minnesota, a realignment of staffing, the poster of Greg Bovino, the deployment of Tom Homan, and a general sense from Donald Trump that we are going to take a different approach here. Matt, what is going on here? You know how Republican White Houses operate. What's the story?
You know, what's interesting here, the language we're using. We're talking about retreat. We're talking about peace with honor withdrawal from Minnesota. Last week, we talked about, are we in a beginning of a new civil war? And the language we're using right here seems to suggest it. But I think what it gets to the heart of it is it still goes to Trump trying to show power. It's about Trump not wanting to admit that he made a mistake, but to try and find a way to claim a victory, even though everything else shows it's a defeat. And I think the other side of it, which really is at the heart of it, is his polling numbers are tanking. Immigration is supposed to be as strong as numbers. He is completely underwater. The economy is underwater. What we're seeing is not a White House necessarily under retreat in Minnesota. We're seeing a White House that is in full-on retreat because the American public is getting ready to revolt against them.
And I say thank God for that. One thing I've never understood about the TACO acronym, this idea that Trump always chickens out, is that it seems to suggest the idea that Trump should stay whatever insane, maniacal course he is on, regardless of feedback from the voters. We've now seen pretty clear proof that there are some things that break through to him. One is a massive public backlash. The other is a massive market backlash. But we saw with his Liberation Day tariffs that there was an intervention. It came from the bond markets. He paid attention and he changed course. I'm not with the whole taco diss. It's good that we can still get through to the Mad King. We would, in any other president, praise the ability to change course. Now, with Trump, he's so pathological that it doesn't come with there were mistakes here. We are going to change course. Barack Obama spoke of receiving a shellacking in the 2010 midterms and doing things differently. You don't see any of that, but at least at the end of the day, there is some change. That's ultimately what we want. The question is, how real is it?
And that kind of brings us to our next topic is, like you mentioned, people have been reassigned, but it also starts to feel like there is this circular firing squad that's happening. Trump is blamed Bovino, Nome is blamed, Miller's blamed Border Patrol blames ICE. When you can send in Tom Homan as the voice of reason on this thing, you've escalated beyond control. But right now, because of this, heads need to roll. The guy who made a living in recent years of saying you're fired so far has done nothing more than reassign people here. But my question to you, Matt, is this enough? Should Kristi Noem be fired? What about Lewandowski? What needs to happen next to really show some solid leadership?
First of all, the public reaction of, okay, Jason has been taken out. We're sending in Freddy Krueger. You're much better off now. Tom Homan is no angel, okay? Tom Homan was the father of the family separation policy. True story. He originally suggested it back when he was a border and customs official back during the Obama administration. They said no to that. He is a co-author of Project 2025. Let's not kid ourselves that this is some kind of a reasonable centrist or anything. This is, as I suggested at the top, a classic Washington blame-storming exercise. I suggested weeks ago that you would have seen a house cleaning under any other administration after that disastrous White House oil executive meeting that went so terribly for the president a few weeks ago. And yes, of course, Kristi Noem should be fired. People should have been fired a long time ago. And this is what you do to protect the president. We should not let Trump get away with that, though. I suggested in my live stream on Tuesday, the blame here is not transferable. The buck stops with Trump. He's the one who empowered these sociopaths like Stephen Miller to live out their insane right-wing fantasies and engage this poorly trained, highly armed paramilitary and deploy them into American streets to shoot American civilians. This is absolutely beyond, well, you just fire some people. So yeah, you should fire everybody and then he should get fired.
Look, absolutely should fire Kristi Noem. Corey Lewandowski needs to go. Like this was never a setup that was going to work. She's in way over her head. We've talked about it many times. This is what happens when you hire incompetent people. You get incompetent results. But pretending the buck doesn't stop with Trump is just an absolute mistake. He is the one at the top of this. He is the one who we cannot distance the blame here. He should be held accountable for this. And if Republicans think that this is just going to disappear in 9-10 months, they're sadly mistaken. And we're going to pay the price for this.
In the face of this large-scale authoritarian assault on America, and as you said earlier in your Trump dump, the president openly violating the Constitution, going to war without congressional authority, seemingly erasing the Bill of Rights, comedian Bill Maher has put his finger on the biggest problems that Democrats face. It is, of course, woke Hollywood celebrities. His quote, woke celebrities don't strike people in most of the country as sensible or in touch with reality. And he suggests, and the New York Post picked up on this, that this is what really the Democrats need to do. They need to get Hollywood to shut the F up. Matt, clearly this is the biggest challenge we face in America, right?
Far the biggest issue, forget immigration, it is all about Hollywood right now. And it feels like that is something someone in Hollywood would absolutely believe. Look, Democrats do have a problem here, but it's not as big as Bill Maher would like to think. The issue is Democrats don't have a good, strong, solid leader. And Hollywood has a big voice. And so every award show, it is every Republican loves to just go out and talk about whatever woke nonsense that came up. It becomes a great talking point for Republicans that we continue to say, see, look at that. That's what Democrats really believe. That's why you can't go that far. It's a talking point. It highlights where I think the weaknesses are for some Democrats because there is no solid, concise voice out there.
I will say, though, there is more than a kernel of truth here. Democrats have not fundamentally confronted the reality that they lost to this guy. Americans are not waking up in 2026 and suddenly saying, oh, I had no idea that Donald Trump was an unhinged, cognitively declining narcissist, pathological, insane, not in touch with reality demagogue. They knew this about him. None of this is new. And despite everything, his approval rating is still 40%. And Democrats, our approval rating is not much different. When that equivalence is coming from the voters, maybe we should admit that we have a little bit of a problem. And sure, you can chalk it up to the power of right-wing media. You can chalk it up, as you did, to a lack of full-throated and coherent and compelling spokespeople for the party, a leader. Sure, all true. But maybe it's also the fact that we continue to have a perception problem with some of the positions, and putting out front the wokest among us, maybe not our best strategy.
You're 100% correct on that. And I think one of the issues that it really begins to highlight here is what the appearance is that it is nothing but an anti-Trump resistance. And as Harris proved, that doesn't necessarily get you your swing votes, which brings us to our next topic. Donald Trump did a rally in Iowa where he stated, I am going to spend all of 2026 campaigning. Now, I just want to say to Democrats, you're welcome. That's going to help you because it's not going to help us. I had an interesting conversation this week with a friend of mine who's a big Trump supporter. And what I think most people forget here is that for the people who decide elections, they don't look at Donald Trump and say, yes, this is working. For the people who decide elections, see the visuals in Minnesota. When they see their checking account go down, they see affordability as a problem, not a hoax. And so when Trump is out there campaigning for all of 2026, yeah, it's going to rally the base here in conservative states, and it's going to anger the Democrats. But my question to you is, in swing states, does Trump campaigning help Republicans or help Democrats?
So the conventional wisdom about midterm elections is that they are turnout elections. Presidential elections tend to be more persuasion elections. The reason for that is that presidential elections drive higher turnout. And so if you have a lot more people showing up because it's the big show, it's the Super Bowl of elections, then you have more available persuadable voters. That's where the margin's going to be.
All true.
Midterm turnouts are much lower. And so the exercise is seen as much more of who can you get to motivate them to show up. Now, this has become an excuse in the Democratic Party, and a bad one in recent years, to say, we can let our freak flag fly. We can be as woke as we want to be because that motivates our base. Getting further left is what fires up voters who are intermittent voters who may or may not show up. There is reams of evidence at this point. That is not true. The question here is the converse true for the Republican Party. I think there is some evidence that Trump is able to motivate that MAGA base. But what is not well established is, can he motivate them to show up in midterm elections? That has not been true previously. And so the odds are against this working, but it might. It might.
In order for Republicans to maintain a majority or not get their butt kicked or maybe even hold on to the Senate, is you got to get those voters in the middle. And those voters in the middle in swing states, Trump hurts. He just does.
For our next story, It's a little bit on the nose for a show that's called Political Rehab. We are talking about America's most popular drug by far, social media, and specifically infinite scrolling, algorithmically driven reels, shorts. Oh no, wait, we like YouTube shorts.
Yes, we
do
do.
really, really well on this show on YouTube shorts. YouTube
Like and
shorts are
subscribe.
great. Yes, and subscribe. YouTube shorts are great if you're an adult and you don't have a particularly vulnerable brain. But it turns out they're not great for children. In fact, this morning, I caught my 9-year-old watching YouTube shorts and I said, son, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Get off of YouTube shorts. He said, it's fine, Dad. I'm just doing cocaine. And I said, oh, phew. Thank goodness. This is actually in the news right now because there are major legal cases unfolding with TikTok agreeing to a landmark settlement on youth addiction to their product. Meta and YouTube are heading toward trial over claims that their platforms harm young users. Matt, what do you make of all of this?
What I find interesting is that Facebook and Meta have decided to keep this going to court as though they are somehow not a part of this problem. Anybody who's worked in politics can tell you firsthand that social media is addictive. It's how we drive messages. It's how we target you. We use that fully to our advantage. And we do it because we know that everybody they get so addicted to their phone. That's the easiest, quickest way to go after a message. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we always talked about television, more eyeballs. We're going to get more eyeballs. Now we still run the TV ads, but we are going after social media because we know you're spending hours on the screen. And if it's happening with adults, it's starting with kids. And it's always interesting when lawmakers and the public policy come up on this because they're so behind the curve. And I think that might be what Meta is banking on, is to try to prove somehow that it's not as addictive as drugs or tobacco, but they're clearly using the same thought process and their algorithms reflect it.
First of all, I'd like to clarify before the Department of Child Welfare comes after me that my child does not use cocaine. Occasionally, he does use YouTube Shorts, and that is a problem. I think this is an issue that has become politicized because Republicans have tried to claim that they are the victims of some kind of deplatforming persecution, which is bullshit. Democrats have worried about whether these platforms have been manipulated by Russians and trolls and bots and Russian bot trolls to affect the outcome of elections. Unquestionably, they have. The baseline issue here is that we all are carrying around addiction machines in our pockets. There is an issue and there's a reckoning coming here. And I'm with you. I'm not sure why you don't see Meta and YouTube settling. Mm-hmm. With that, we are going to go on to a new version of our rotating segment. This is Burning Questions.
Quick hits. Big issues. Welcome to Burning Questions.
So the idea here is that we usually do our rundown and we hit 5 topics and we do them in bite-sized chunks. But in recent weeks, the discussion of ICE and Minnesota and the murders and the violence, and before that, the invasion of Venezuela, the threats against Greenland, there have been these big marquee stories that have blotted out the sun and not left a lot of room for all kinds of other stories that are going on in the background. And we would like to hit all of them because there are some burning questions involved. Let's hit our first one right now. There is a fight unfolding over Trump administration access to voter rolls. Matt Wylie, what is going on here? Is this incredibly sus, even as a Republican?
Yes, we talked about this on our last episode. The fact that government is now trying to control big data really gets to the heart of how it's going to be manipulated and the new power struggle that's out there. And what people don't realize is that states control their own elections. And it is not a federal government issue. And so for the federal government then to come in and say they want voter rolls, and in this week even, Pam Bondi sent a letter to Governor Walz of Minnesota outlining 3 steps to bring back law and order. And one of them was all the federal data, voter roll information. And it's just ripe for abuse. And there's going to be allegations of fraud, and it's going to bring back electoral issues. But at the heart of this becomes another way for the federal government to control citizens that isn't constitutional.
Yeah, the idea of this incredibly corrupt, politically motivated hack getting access to our most vital data and using it in a way to menace Americans potentially concerned about being threatened by ICE, being picked up by a paramilitary force when they go to vote, and suppressing voter turnout. Yeah, of course we should worry about all these things because this administration has zero credibility. They never tell the truth about anything. We've seen it in the wake of the murders happening in Minnesota. We have no reason to trust them about this. And this is why multiple federal judges have shot the administration down in these fishing expeditions in Georgia, in California, in Oregon, and they should continue to do. This is dangerous and altogether terrible. A federal judge has ordered the acting chief of ICE to appear in court and warned of possible contempt charges after the agency allegedly ignored court orders. And by allegedly, most definitely that happened. Matt, what to make of the Trump administration and their paramilitary completely ignoring the courts?
It's off the rails at this point in time. Fortunately, last night, late on Wednesday, the judge canceled the contempt order because they did provide some information, but there's still 96 court orders in 74 cases that haven't been. And it continues to show the complete disregard that this administration has for the rule of law while out there pretending they're for the rule of law. And they think it's men in masks and paramilitary, but the rule of law is the courts. And the rule of law is one of the important pieces of checks and balances. And I think this is something every American should be angry about. Next up, and we've talked about this one a little bit, but it continues to drive, and I think it's going to drive a story for a long time, more and more GOP retirements. I think members are just running for the hills. It is part of what happens every year. But Matt, what do you make of this? What do you make about so many Republicans are now retiring from Congress?
What triggered this story was the latest announcement. Vern Buchanan, a 20-year veteran Republican from Florida, announcing his retirement. We've discussed this in our political prediction segment a few weeks ago. We both thought that we might set a new record. We're not on pace to do that. In fact, some of the commentary recently has been around the idea that we're not quite on the pace that we thought we would be. We are nonetheless ahead of the pace that we've seen in recent election cycles. 49 incumbent members of the U.S. House have announced that they will not seek re-election. In the last 4 election cycles, there were 40 retirements in 2024, 41 at this point in 2022, 34 in 2020, and 42 in 2018. So we're ahead of pace, but it's not like we're seeing the absolute landslide that we thought we would. But it's still early. And so I think it's an indication that Republicans see the writing on the wall. They see this is going to be an extremely tough midterm environment, but it's a weak signal, not the strong signal that we might have anticipated. Here's a news story that slipped under the radar. A European leader, the Prime Minister of Slovakia, of all places, who is an ally and a friend of Donald Trump's, spoke privately, but it emerged in Politico, of shock at seeing Donald Trump's state of mind after a Mar-a-Lago meeting, described him as his psychological state as being dangerous. You're shocked to hear this, right, Matt?
I just think this is perhaps more dangerous than anything we've seen in the past. I think what we're seeing is Trump, as he has tried to realign the world order, you're starting to see allies become much more doing what friends do, standing up and saying, this isn't right. This isn't who we thought we had. Quite frankly, I wish more Republicans would stand up and say things here at home. There is a story out there of Ted Cruz saying a few things and Republican criticizing behind closed doors. That's where it seems to be right now. But I think the reality is, whether you're abroad or here, there are a lot of questions about Trump's ability to lead, his mental fitness. And that, again, should alarm every American. Like, this should not be what we have as a country. We should have people who can execute their duties and deliver for the American people. And cheers to him for saying this. We need more people who see it and have these meetings, talk about it more.
Yeah, I'd like to give him a brown medal. That's not gold, silver, or bronze. It's the color that it suggests. And a hearty golf clap for whispering quietly that the emperor has no clothes. Wow. Profiles and courage, man. Profiles and courage.
All right. So there's a story this week. Maybe Democrat strategy should be much more go after immigration, go into the heart of the line, attack the strength, so to speak. Matt, like, you're talking to your friends, your colleagues. What are Democrats thinking here? Should they start talking immigration? Should they attack the strength? Should they go after this issue?
Yeah, this is the Karl Rove doctrine, attack the strength. You saw it in the Swift boat attacks on John Kerry, where at the time, 20 years ago, his greatest strength was perceived as being his military service record, in contrast to George W. Bush's, what was his deferment reason? Anyway, the point is, it was seen as a point of strength. So the first thing they did was attack the strength. It's actually a strategy that goes back to Alexander the Great. There's a long treatise I have on this on my bookshelf behind me. Suffice it to say, this is not the approach the Democrats have been taking. They have seen immigration as an issue on which to play defense. But now, as you say, there is an opening because polling has radically changed when it comes to ICE. Vast majorities of Americans see ICE as overreaching, being too violent, too excessive. And so there is this question, there is this discussion going on right now. Democrats, they are standing on firm moral principle to rein in ICE and to draw a line and to say, we are not going to support a dime of further funding unless we put some restrictions on ICE. But I just don't want my party to interpret that as, let's go all the way to abolishing ICE. That's not quite where Americans are. Americans remain deeply divided on immigration. We're in many places on it. And I think it all sums up to Americans continue to want stronger border enforcement, and they want violent criminals to be deported, but they don't want what the Trump administration is doing. That's the position we should be in. And is it a political opportunity? Sure, but it won't be for long if we overreach on it.
I agree with that. Look, I think it is a great political opportunity for you. And as I said in my Trump dump several weeks ago, we've definitely fucked up the immigration issue for Republicans. We've taken our strongest issue and we've made it toxic. So there is an opening there. I think the caution for Democrats is exactly what you said. How do they talk about it without sounding like it's just anti-Trump or it's an abolish ICE kind of thing? And so they need to figure out how to recalibrate that message for today's elections, because I will say Republicans are vulnerable on this one right now. And we don't have an easy way back unless Democrats figure out how to screw it up.
Well, here's a headline for you. The head of the U.S. Cybersecurity Agency reportedly uploaded sensitive government documents into a public chat GPT, triggering security alarms. This obviously connects to the earlier story that we discussed about the data deep dives that Pam Bondi is trying to perpetrate in state voter rolls. Matt, wow, what is going on with this? You gotta love the competence of this Republican administration of yours.
I think you've said it over and over again. When you hire bad people, you just get bad results. This is
That's it.
why. Yeah, I mean, it really is. I don't need to say much more. Is we just, whether it was Signalgate or this, or we accidentally releasing Social Security information to unsecured, we constantly screw this up. And trust in American government's already so low. Trust in this administration and Congress is already so low. And all this does is to continue to show why they're right to not trust this administration.
It also shows the threat and the danger of using AI to substitute for actual. It is inevitably tempting. You and I, we use AI tools to help us with research, but we have a rule. We don't let AI determine what comes out of our mouths, what comes out of our fingertips. We won't let AI think for us. We'll let AI research for us. That is a massive difference. And I will tell you that every piece of AI research that I get, I fact check, I cross check, and then I think, and then I reformulate it in my own thoughts. The whole point of having a cybersecurity chief is to have someone who is a deep expert who can do that executive function, not to offload that function to ChatGPT. And it is incredibly disturbing and dangerous to have experts. This is what we saw with experts in critical domains outsourcing their thinking when they have a public trust to an AI tool. It's remarkable the level of brain drain that we're seeing in this administration. With that is it. And let's get to our fun weekly segment. That's bullshit.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit.
Bullshit.
A bullshit?
It's cold. Damn, is it cold. This is an actual photo I just took of our back shed and the snow piled around it, which my kids were able to use as a ladder to climb to the top and build a snow cave like they were on the planet Hoth. So it's freaking freezing, and that led the President of the United States to say this.
Could the environmental insurrectionist please explain whatever happened to global warming?
But of course, this isn't the first time he's made this stupid argument.
The coldest ever recorded. In coming days, expected to get even colder. People can't last outside even for minutes. What the hell is going on with global whamming? Please come back fast. We need you.
And to be fair, he's hardly the first dumbass to fall prey to it.
Let's take a look at the day outside, and it is frightful. Yeah, that global warming thing's really kicking into high gear, isn't it?
Whenever we have a cold snap like this, I will inevitably get comments like this. Where's your global warming now? Global warming, LOL. Whatever happened to global warming?
But here's the thing. It's bullshit. And I'll let an actual credible meteorologist make the point.
A temperature, or a stretch of temperatures, whether it's hot or cold, does not negate nor support global warming.
That's right. First of all, the U.S. represents only about 2% of the Earth's surface. Global warming is, wait for it, global. And the last 3 years around the globe have been the warmest on record. Even right now, Australia, Africa, the Arctic, Antarctica, Asia, Canada, much of Europe, and even Greenland are warmer than normal, with Greenland basically exporting its coldness to us in a giant middle finger, and yet another example of Trump's failing trade policy. Second of all, extreme cold snaps in one place don't disprove global warming. It's actually the opposite.
More dramatic extremes in both cold and hot are symptoms of climate change.
When we have an excursion of warmth, it's more magnified. When we sometimes have an excursion of cold, it can be more amplified.
Whatever weather pattern you get in tends to stick around a little bit longer, and that can lead to more extreme events.
That's right. The Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the global average, which is disrupting atmospheric patterns. Just remember that record hot days now vastly outnumber record cold days. And finally, let's just remember the bottom line, which is that 97% of climate scientists agree that human-caused climate change is happening. Look, if people want to argue that some have gone overboard on global warming alarmism or on policies that involve too much sacrifice in people's material well-being, that's totally reasonable. It could even be right. But that's not the same thing as denying that human-caused global warming is real. That's just a piece of ice-cold bullshit.
Great. Fantastic. Another great segment.
All right. We have a very special edition this week of our closing segment, Dose of Hope. Normally, Matt and I do a dose of hope for each of us. But this week, and this is very meta of us, we're going to join forces and talk about one dose of hope that we want to cover together, because news has been dominated by the murder of Alex Preti. After his tragic death, his parents asked for all of us to focus not just on how he died, but also on how he lived. And we think it's really instructive to think for a moment about both.
Let's acknowledge up front that there's footage of Preti kicking a car and spitting on ICE agents in a previous protest. It's true, but it's not material to what we're talking about today. Because in his last moments of his life, Alex Preti ran towards danger, not away from it. He rushed to help a stranger, fully aware that the moment was volatile, chaotic, and combustible. He knew it was a powder keg, and he stepped forward anyway. He was pepper sprayed. A struggle followed. Seconds later, he was shot and killed. But that instinct to help, to intervene, to protect someone else, even in the face of mortal danger, that is one of the deepest through lines in American history. It's the same instinct that we saw in the Greatest Generation when they went across oceans to stop fascism. The same instinct that drove first responders into burning buildings on 9/11. It's the same instinct that shows up every day in ordinary people doing extraordinary things when no one else is asking them to do it.
Which is a great segue to talking about how Alex Preti lived. Now, he wasn't perfect. Who is? And he also wasn't only one thing. Consider just a few facts about him. He was an ICU nurse who dedicated his professional life to caring for veterans. He was blessed, apparently, with an operatic singing voice, and he was also a registered gun owner allowed to open carry, a right he exercised. In high school, he acted, he was passionate about the outdoors, and a classmate described him as an all-American guy. An all-American guy. Exactly. Can you put a singing, nursing, gun-toting, anti-ICE outdoorsman who hangs out with vets into a neat political box? In his epitaph, is there an ideology? No. He was an American with all of the contradictions and nuances and flaws that entails, especially for the vast majority of us who still consider ourselves to be Americans first and members of a political party a very distant second or fifth or 20th. Someone who could passionately protest and carry a gun at the same time, expressing two fundamental rights at the core of who we are.
You don't have to be flawless to embody the American spirit. You just have to be willing to step forward when someone else is in trouble. And if that is any hope left in the country, it's this. That instinct still exists. That spirit is still alive. And it's bigger than any protest, any politician, or any narrative trying to erase it.
In the contradictions that we embody as a people are part of our strength. Like Alex Preti, we're not one thing. E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. We are an alloy, and that makes us stronger. It makes us better.
That's who we are, or at least who we still want to be.
And that is the purpose of this show. For Matt, I'm Matt. We'll see you next time.